What if everything you've ever been through, every struggle, every sacrifice, was invisible to the world around you? Imagine carrying the weight of your dreams and challenges every single day, only to be judged for something as simple as being late. But what happens when someone finally sees you, truly sees you? What if that moment could change everything? This is the story of how one student found his voice, shattered the walls of silence, and inspired change with just one raw, honest moment. Are you ready to hear the truth? It was a typical Monday morning at Eastwood High, where the students shuffled through the hallways, exchanging stories from their weekends. The sun was barely peeking through the windows as the first bell rang, signaling the start of the school day. The classroom was alive with the usual hum of chatter, but as the teacher, Mrs. Hamilton, walked into the room, a sense of unease filled the air. She was known for her sharp tongue and strict attitude, a figure of authority who commanded respect. With her commanding presence, the students took their seats, straightening up as Mrs. Hamilton began her roll call. She was a woman of few words, and her expectations were always clear. Punctuality was a must, and lateness was not tolerated. The clock ticked steadily, and as the last name on the roll was read, the door swung open with a sudden squeak, cutting through the air. It was Malik. He stepped into the classroom a few minutes late, his backpack slightly askew on his shoulder. His face, usually calm, was flushed with the rush of running from the bus stop to the school building. As he entered, his eyes darted nervously across the room. But before he could sit down, Mrs. Hamilton's sharp voice rang out like a whip, snapping everyone's attention to him. "Late again, Malik," she exclaimed, her eyes narrowing. The entire class fell into a tense silence, each student fully aware of the tension that hung in the air. Malik's stomach twisted into knots as he heard the judgment in her voice. His heart raced, the familiar knot of dread tightening in his chest. It wasn't the first time he had been late, but it still stung just as much as the first. He tried to speak, to explain himself, but Mrs. Hamilton didn't give him a chance. "How many times have I told you that you need to be on time?" Her words cut through the room, sharper than any blade. "This is the third time this week, Malik. Do you even care about your education?" The room seemed to freeze. All the students sat in their seats, eyes glued to the scene unfolding before them. They had seen Mrs. Hamilton yell at other students before, but this time, there was something different in the way she spoke to Malik. The anger was palpable, and it was all directed at him. No one dared speak up. Some students exchanged uncomfortable glances, others simply stared at their desks, unsure of how to respond. Malik's mind raced. He had heard this all before. Every time he was late, there was a storm of harsh words, waiting for him. He had learned to accept it, to endure the anger, but today something felt different. He stood there in silence, biting his lip to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. The embarrassment, the shame, it all flooded him at once. The reason he was late, the one he had been trying to avoid, was his mother. She worked long hours, cleaning office buildings to make sure Malik had everything he needed. This morning had been no different. She had woken him up earlier than usual to help her with something, and when he had rushed to the bus stop, he had found her struggling with a heavy load. He had to help her. There was no question in his mind. His mother was everything to him, and he couldn't just leave her. But now, standing in front of the class, the reality of his tardiness was crushing him. Mrs. Hamilton's anger didn't let up. "You need to get your priorities straight," she continued, her voice echoing through the room. "You won't get far if you keep acting like this." Malik clenched his fists, fighting the sting of her words. He didn't know how much longer he could keep it all inside. The weight of his struggles, the fear of disappointing his mother, the constant pressure to be perfect in a world that seemed so indifferent, it was too much. But the teacher's words echoed in his ears, and all he could do was stand there, silent, wondering if anyone would ever understand the real reason behind his tardiness. And that was when it hit him, the realization that Mrs. Hamilton didn't see him, not truly. She didn't see the sacrifices, the long hours, or the love that kept him going. All she saw was a student who couldn't manage to show up on time, and that was all she cared about. In that moment, Malik felt smaller than ever before. His stomach churned as he stood frozen, awaiting the next scolding. What could he possibly say that would make her understand? Malik sat down slowly at his desk, trying to block out the sting of Mrs. Hamilton's words. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor seemed to echo louder than usual, a harsh reminder of how all eyes were still on him. His mind raced as he tried to process the scene, but every thought circled back to one thing: his mother. He could still hear her voice in his head, the way she had called out to him that morning, a soft whisper that tugged at his heart. "Malik, baby, help me with these bags, will you?" It was barely 6 a.m. when Malik had gotten out of bed. His alarm clock blared its usual screech, but his mother had woken him even earlier than that. She was up, already preparing to head out for her long shift as a janitor at the local office building. The hours were grueling, but they both knew that her job was what kept them afloat. She worked tirelessly to ensure Malik could attend school, to give him a chance at a better life than the one she had been handed. Malik didn't complain about the early mornings. He had learned to sacrifice his own sleep, understanding that helping his mother meant everything to her. He had always known the value of hard work, seeing his mother's dedication and grit firsthand. So, When he had seen her struggling this morning with 2 heavy bags of cleaning supplies, her face weary from the long hours, he didn't think twice. "Malik, can you help me? I'm running late today," she had asked. It wasn't a question he could ignore. His mother's back had been hurting for days, the result of too many hours hunched over, cleaning after people who never even noticed the effort she put into her work. Malik had seen the toll it took on her body, the constant ache in her shoulders, the way she winced when she bent down to tie her shoes, but she never complained. She just kept going, always for him. "Sure, Mom, let me grab my stuff," Malik had said, rushing to gather his things. He knew he couldn't leave her to struggle alone. He would make it to school on time eventually, but for that moment, his priority was her. He didn't care if it meant missing the bus. He didn't care if it meant being late for class. Helping her was what mattered most. But now, in the classroom, sitting in front of Mrs. Hamilton and the rest of the students, Malik couldn't escape the feeling of guilt that pressed down on him. He had seen his mother work tirelessly, day in and day out, to make sure he could go to school, and here he was being punished for being a few minutes late. The irony of it stung more than he could articulate. He thought about how he had tried to make it to school on time, running down the street, breathless and exhausted, his legs burning with the effort. The bus was already gone, and his only choice was to take the next one, which would make him late. But Malik didn't care. He wasn't about to leave his mother to fend for herself, no matter how much it meant to get an earful from his teacher. Malik had always been taught that the road to success wasn't easy, that every sacrifice would be worth it in the end. But that didn't make the weight of the struggle any less heavy. Every day he carried the burden of his mother's sacrifices, trying to make her proud. Yet, all he ever seemed to get in return were harsh words from the one place he thought he could find support, his school. His mother never asked for anything in return. She never complained when she had to go without. She only wanted Malik to have the best life he could. And here, in the classroom, it felt like her sacrifices were invisible. The weight of it all was suffocating. Malik's heart ached as he sat there trying to ignore the burning sensation in his eyes. He fought to keep the tears at bay, but it was hard. The shame, the frustration, it was too much for him to carry in silence any longer. His mind wandered back to his mother's tired eyes, her worn-out hands, the way she smiled even when she was exhausted. She didn't give up, and neither would Malik. But right now, in this classroom, he felt like giving up was the only option. The pain of being misunderstood was heavier than any school lesson he had ever learned. As the bell rang, signaling the start of the lesson, Malik tried to focus on the lecture, but his thoughts remained consumed with his mother's tired face, her sacrifice, and the struggle of trying to be seen in a world that often overlooked him. Malik stood frozen in front of Mrs. Hamilton, his heart pounding in his chest, his fists clenched by his sides. The harshness of her words echoed in his ears, but something inside him snapped. It wasn't just the usual sting of being reprimanded. Today, it felt like something more, like he was standing at the edge of a precipice, with everything he had ever held in his heart about his struggles and sacrifices hanging in the balance. His eyes were wide, his breath shallow, and for a brief moment, the whole classroom faded away. All he could hear was the pounding of his heartbeat and the voice of his mother, that gentle whisper calling out to him for help earlier this morning. She had asked for help. How could he not answer her? The words that had been bubbling inside him for so long, words he had buried under layers of silence and self-restraint, came rushing to the surface. He couldn't keep them in any longer. Not today. Not when everything he had done, every sacrifice he had made, was reduced to a mere point of judgment in Mrs. Hamilton's eyes. With a deep breath, Malik opened his mouth, his voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. "You don't know what it's like, Mrs. Hamilton," he said, his voice rising as he spoke. The room fell eerily silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. All eyes turned to him, and for the first time that day, Malik felt like he had everyone's attention. The class watched in stunned silence, unsure of what was happening but too captivated to interrupt. Mrs. Hamilton's face froze. She had not expected this. She was used to reprimanding students, used to their excuses, their half-hearted apologies. But Malik's words were different. They weren't just an excuse, they were the truth, raw and unfiltered. Malik didn't pause. He couldn't. He needed her to understand. "I'm not just late because I don't care," he continued, his voice barely more than a whisper now, but each word still held a weight that could not be ignored. "I help my mom. She works all day every day, cleaning offices, making sure I have everything I need. You don't see that, Mrs. Hamilton. You don't see her. You don't see how tired she is when she comes home, how hard she works just so I can come to school and try to make something of myself." The words spilled out of him, unrestrained now, and he felt like he had been holding his breath for years. "I don't ask for sympathy. I don't ask for special treatment, but I'm doing the best I can. I'm just trying to make her proud. I'm trying to make something of myself, because she deserves more than this. She deserves a better life, a life where I can give back everything she's given to me." His voice wavered as he spoke, but he didn't stop. There was too much at stake now. He couldn't keep silent about the pain, about the long hours he had spent juggling school, helping his mom, and trying to be a student who excelled in class. The pressure was immense, and every part of him felt like it was breaking under the weight of it. I can't always be perfect. I can't always get here on time, but I am here. I show up because I want to learn, because I want to be better for her and for me. Malik's words hung in the air, a fragile honesty that seemed to break through the hard shell of Mrs. Hamilton's tough exterior. For a moment, there was only silence. No judgment, no reprimands, just the truth. Malik looked at Mrs. Hamilton, his chest rising and falling with each breath. The class was still, every student now caught in the gravity of his revelation. Malik had said something they had all thought but never dared to voice. He had given them a glimpse into his world, a world of sacrifice, of struggle, of unspoken battles. The teacher stared at him, her face unreadable. The anger that had filled her earlier had melted away, replaced by something softer, something she hadn't expected to feel: guilt. She had seen so many students come and go, but Malik's words pierced her in a way she couldn't ignore. For the first time, she wondered, had she been too quick to judge? Had she missed something more important than punctuality? The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had been so focused on rules, on what a good student looked like, that she had failed to see the full story. But now, standing in front of her, Malik had opened her eyes to the truth of sacrifices that went unnoticed, the struggles that people like Malik faced every day, simply to survive. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "I didn't know," she said, the words barely audible. "I'm sorry, Malik." And in that moment, the tension in the room began to shift. The weight of her apology didn't feel like an excuse, it felt like a recognition of the humanity behind the grades, behind the rules, behind the expectations. For the first time, Mrs. Hamilton saw Malik not just as a student who had been late, but as a person who had been carrying an enormous weight, trying to hold it together. Malik nodded slowly, his face softening, but his eyes still holding the quiet strength of someone who had fought and still fought for everything he had. The classroom was frozen in an unexpected stillness. Malik's words had just cut through the air, raw and unfiltered. But for a moment, there was no sound, sharp retort from Mrs. Hamilton, no murmurs from the students, just silence, the kind that settles deep in your bones and makes everything feel like it's suspended in time. Malik stood there, feeling exposed, vulnerable, as if he had stripped away every layer of armor he had ever built around himself. For years he had carried the burden of his mother's sacrifices, of his own dreams, all while keeping up appearances. He had learned to hide the struggle behind a facade of resilience. But now here he was, finally letting the weight of it all spill out, into the open. And yet, in the stillness, all he could think was, did anyone hear me? His heartbeat was the only thing he could hear, pounding loudly in his ears. Sweat was forming at the back of his neck, and his hands trembled slightly as he clasped them in front of him. The fear of what might come next crept up his spine. What if Mrs. Hamilton wasn't moved? What if she still saw him as a failure for being late? What if the apology she had murmured was just words, empty and hollow, meant to placate him rather than genuinely acknowledge the truth? But as the seconds ticked by, Malik felt something shift in the room. It wasn't a dramatic change, but there was a subtle change in the atmosphere, something that made him look up from the floor and dare to meet Mrs. Hamilton's gaze. She was still standing in the front of the room, her expression unreadable. Her lips were pressed tightly together, and her eyes were focused on him, but not with the anger he had expected. There was no reprimand in her gaze, no fire of judgment. Instead, it was a kind of soft, regretful look, a look that was almost foreign to Malik. It was as if, in those few moments of silence, she had gone somewhere deeper, somewhere away from the classroom and into a place where empathy could take root. The class remained quiet. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what to make of the tension in the air. Others, like Nadia, who sat near the front, were watching Mrs. Hamilton closely, waiting for the teacher's next move. It wasn't like Mrs. Hamilton to show this kind of vulnerability. Her usual cold, authoritative demeanor was nowhere to be found. She wasn't just a teacher anymore. She was a person grappling with something bigger, something more complex than just grades, tardiness, or classroom rules. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Hamilton spoke. But this time her voice was softer. The harsh edge was gone, replaced by something gentler, something human. "Malik," she started, her tone tentative, as if she were unsure of how to continue. For a moment, Malik felt his chest tightened, the weight of anticipation almost unbearable. Would she brush him off? Would she let him down again? But when she spoke next, her words hit him in a way that he hadn't expected. "I didn't know. I'm sorry," she said quietly, the words barely above a whisper. Her gaze never left his. "I've always been so focused on the rules, on punctuality, that I never stopped to consider what might be going on beyond that. I should have understood, I should have asked. I see now that there's more to you than just a student who's late. You're right, I didn't see you, and I'm sorry for that." Her apology hung in the air, heavy and sincere, and it was enough to knock the breath out of Malik. He had spent so long feeling invisible, fighting to be seen, to be understood, and now, finally, someone was truly seeing him. It wasn't just an apology for being late. It was an acknowledgement of his humanity, of the struggles he carried every day, of the quiet strength that held him together. For the first time in his Malik felt a shift not just in the room, but inside himself. He had expected to be judged, to be written off as a student who couldn't keep up. But Mrs. Hamilton, for all her faults, had given him something he hadn't expected. She had given him the space to be real, to be vulnerable. She had listened and she had understood. A weight seemed to lift from his chest, one that he hadn't even realized he had been carrying. The anger and frustration that had simmered within him for so long seemed to dissipate, replaced by something lighter. There was still a long way to go, but in this moment, something had changed. Mrs. Hamilton's recognition felt like the beginning of something new, a new kind of relationship, one that wasn't built on fear or authority but on mutual respect and understanding. The class sat in stunned silence, but for Malik it was no longer uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with possibility, with the promise of change. And for the first time in a long time, Malik felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. The silence that followed Mrs. Hamilton's apology wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a moment of reflection, a moment of understanding that enveloped the entire classroom. For Malik, the weight that had been pressing down on him for so long began to lift. He stood there, trying to process what had just happened, unsure if he had imagined it or if it was real. But as he looked around, he saw something he hadn't seen before in his classmates: empathy. Some students nodded subtly, their expressions softening as they understood, perhaps for the first time, what Malik had been carrying. Malik's chest still ached, but it wasn't from shame or frustration anymore. It was something different, relief, maybe. Mrs. Hamilton had acknowledged his struggles, not with pity, but with understanding. And for that, Malik felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The truth he had buried so deep had finally been recognized, and that recognition felt like a gift. Mrs. Hamilton took a step forward, her voice quieter now but filled with sincerity. Malik, thank you for sharing that with me. I need to be better, not just for you but for all my students. I've been too focused on the rules, on the surface level things, and I've missed what really matters. I'll do better. I'll listen more. Her words were not just an apology but a promise. The promise to not only see the students in front of her but to understand the complexities of their lives, the struggles that often went unnoticed. It wasn't just about punctuality anymore. It was about recognizing the humanity behind the student. The class remained silent, but the energy in the room had shifted. It was as if the tension that had built up over the years, tension between teachers and students, between expectations and reality, had dissolved. Mrs. Hamilton had let down her guard, and in doing so, she had opened a door for the rest of the class to step through. Malik felt something stir inside him. He had never expected this. In his mind, teachers were always the ones in control, the ones who had the final say, the ones whose opinions mattered most. But Mrs. Hamilton's vulnerability, her willingness to learn from him, had turned that belief on its head. He had spent years thinking he was just another student to her, another name on the roll call. But now, he saw that he was more than that. He was someone with a story, with struggles, with a reason for everything he did. And that made all the difference. The bell rang, signaling the end of the class, but no one moved right away. The usual rush to pack up and leave didn't happen. Instead, there was a moment of pause, of reflection. Malik slowly gathered his things, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. As he zipped up his bag, he glanced at Mrs. Hamilton, who was standing at the front of the room, looking at him with a soft expression. "Malik," she called as he stood up to leave. "I'm really proud of you, and I'm here if you ever need to talk. Don't ever feel like you're alone in this. You have a voice. Use it." Malik's heart fluttered. He had never heard a teacher say something like that before. He didn't know how to respond at first, so he simply nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. "I will. Thank you," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions that were swirling inside him. As he walked out of the classroom, Malik felt a shift within himself. It wasn't just Mrs. Hamilton's apology that had changed him. It was the realization that things could be different, that he didn't have to keep hiding behind a mask of silence and strength. He could be real, he could be vulnerable, and in doing so, he could build connections, not just with his teachers but with the world around him. The day went on, but Malik's mind kept replaying the conversation in Mrs. Hamilton's classroom. He could still feel the warmth of her apology, the sincerity in her eyes. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There would still be challenges ahead, still moments where he would struggle, still times when he felt invisible. But now, Malik knew he wasn't alone. He had a teacher who saw him, truly saw him, and a class full of students who, in that moment, understood Malik wasn't just a student trying to survive. He was a person with dreams, with purpose, and with the strength to push through the hardships that life threw at him. And for the first time, he believed that just one person saw that too. As he walked down the hall, Malik felt a small but significant shift in his outlook on life. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving, about letting his story be heard, and about using his voice to make a difference. As Malik walked out of that classroom, something deep within him had shifted. The world hadn't changed overnight, and the challenges he faced weren't suddenly gone. But for the first time, he didn't feel like he was facing them alone. The weight that had once seemed unbearable now felt a little lighter, because someone had truly seen him not just as a student, but as a person. In that single moment, when Mrs. Hamilton had listened, when she had acknowledged his struggle, everything felt possible. For the first time, Malik knew that his voice mattered, his story, his sacrifices, and his dreams were worth sharing. And as he stepped into the hallway, ready to face the world once more, he realized that change wasn't just about the big moments, it was about those quiet, powerful ones when someone takes the time to understand, to empathize, and to say, "I see you." For Malik, that was the beginning of something new. It was the start of using his voice, of owning his journey, and of never letting anyone define his worth but himself. And in that moment, he understood the power to create, change, to be heard, and to rise above it had always been within him. Now he was ready to let it shine.